The Sunday brunch table at the Harrison family estate gleamed with inherited silver and fresh flowers that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I sat in my usual spot, the chair closest to the kitchen positioned so I could help serve when needed, cutting my omelet into small, precise pieces. Rosalie. More coffee. My mother, Angela commanded, without looking up from her phone, where she was scrolling through photos of her upcoming Mediterranean cruise. I need to know, have you ever been the one doing all the work at a family gathering, while everyone else treats you like the help? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly how this feels. Of course. Mother. I murmured, my voice barely disturbing the air-conditioned silence of the dining room. I rose, smoothed my skirt, and walked to the sideboard. The coffee service was heavy silver, ornate and impractical, much like everything else in this house. As I poured, I watched my father, Richard, tapping furiously on his tablet, tracking market fluctuations that meant nothing to the world but everything to his ego. Across from him sat my brother, Brandon, picking at a croissant with the bored disdain of a prince forced to endure a peasant's banquet. My sister, Brooke, was busy taking a selfie with her mimosa, angling her face just so to catch the light from the chandeliers. Rosalie, my father said, not looking up, we need to discuss your finances. I froze mid-pour. Finances. My finances were intentionally boring. My cover as a data entry clerk for a mid-tier nonprofit was designed to be unremarkable. It was a camouflage of mediocrity I had worn for 6 years. What about them? I asked. Returning to my seat, I kept my face blank, a skill I'd perfected during high-stakes interrogations, though they just interpreted it as dullness. We've made some adjustments, he said, finally setting down his tablet. He looked at me with the pitying expression one might reserve for a slow child or an injured pet. Your mother and I realized that your savings account, the one you opened 6 years ago, was stagnating. Just sitting there, collecting dust. It was capital inefficiency at its worst. Stagnating, I repeated, my grip tightening on my fork. That account held my hazard pay. Every dollar was earned tracking cyber terrorists through the dark web. Every cent, a receipt for a sleepless night, spent preventing national infrastructure collapse. It wasn't stagnant, it was blood money. Exactly, Brandon chimed in, his mouth full. So we reallocated it, put it to work. Velocity of money. Rosie, you wouldn't understand. Reallocated. The word tasted like ash. What does that mean? We transferred it, my mother said breezily, still scrolling through cruise itineraries. Brandon has a new venture. A revolutionary AI trading algorithm. It needed liquidity for a sudden margin call. We knew you were too timid to invest on your own, darling. So we did it for you. We drained the account. The room seemed to tilt, but my mind snapped into analytical mode. Margin call. That meant Brandon was losing money. Fast. They weren't investing. They were bailing out a sinking ship with my lifeboats. You drained it, all of it. $368,500. My father confirmed, citing the number as if reading a grocery receipt. Don't look so stricken. Rosalie, it's an investment. Brandon's algorithm is projected to triple that within the quarter. We're doing you a favor, saving you from your own mediocrity. You hoard cash because you're afraid of the market. We're teaching you how wealth is actually built. You took my money without asking me. My voice was calm. But inside, alarm bells were ringing. Not just personal ones, federal ones. We didn't need to ask, my mother said, finally looking up to offer me a condescending smile. I co-signed that account when you opened it. Remember, technically, it's family money. And family money supports family genius. Brandon's potential is worth more than your security blanket. Rosalie, you can't just hoard cash while your brother is on the verge of changing the world. It's selfish. They stared at me, expecting gratitude, expecting me to shrink back into my chair and thank them for their financial wisdom. They saw a timid clerk who didn't understand high finance. They didn't see the director of cyber financial intelligence. They didn't see the woman who had frozen assets of dictators and dismantled cartels with a keystroke. They had sacrificed my safety to feed Brandon's ego. And they called it parenting. So, Brandon said, wiping crumbs from his lip with a linen napkin, "You're welcome. Now, pass the butter." I looked at him. I looked at my parents. They weren't just thieves. They were delusional. They believed they owned me. They believed my silence was emptiness, not a vault. They believed my data entry job was a mark of failure, not a cover for a clearance level they couldn't even imagine. They had just committed grand larceny against a federal employee, and they were waiting for a thank you note. "I see," I said, my voice flat. "You invested it." "Exactly." My father nodded, satisfied that the matter was settled. "Now, let's talk about the cruise. Angela, did you book the excursion to Santorini?" I stood up. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to get more wine." "Good girl," my mother said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Bring the 98. Brandon deserves the good stuff today." I walked into the kitchen, the swinging door settling behind me with a soft thud that severed the noise of their self-congratulation. The air in here was different, cooler, sterile, smelling of lemon polish and the metallic tang of the Sub-Zero fridge. I leaned back against the granite island, my hands gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. I didn't scream. Screaming is for people who are surprised. I wasn't surprised. I was calibrating. $368,500. That wasn't just a number. It was the quantifiable sum of my silence. It was hazard pay from nights spent tracking ransomware syndicates through the dark web, while my family slept safely in beds. My intelligence work helped protect. It was the danger bonus from the time a cartel sicario tried to trace my IP in 2021. It was 6 years of missed holidays, canceled dates, and the crushing weight of a double life. All liquidated in a single wire transfer to cover a margin call for a brother who thought due diligence was a suggestion. I stared at the stainless steel reflection of the wine fridge. In the dining room, they were likely laughing about how they'd saved me. That was the most dangerous part of a narcissist's logic, the complete inability to distinguish between theft and benevolence. To Richard and Angela Harrison, I wasn't a separate entity with property rights. I was an extension of the estate. I was the guest house they hadn't rented out, the old car they kept in the garage. When the main house Brandon needed repairs, you didn't ask the garage for permission to sell the old car. You just did it. You liquidated the lesser asset to save the flagship. This is the illusion of power they lived in. They believed that because they created me, they owned me. They mistook my data entry cover story for a lack of ambition. And they mistook my strategic silence for a lack of substance. It's a common fatal error in intelligence analysis, assuming that a quiet signal means an empty channel. They looked at me and saw a void, a timid, risk-averse clerk who needed her hand held. They didn't realize that the void was actually a vault, reinforced with titanium and locked from the inside. I closed my eyes, running a mental inventory of the betrayal. It wasn't just the money. Money is fiat. It can be printed. It was the violation of the architecture. They had bypassed a security protocol I set up specifically to keep them out. Using the emotional backdoor of a co-signature I had foolishly granted 6 years ago as a gesture of trust. They had weaponized my own attempt at connection against me. Velocity of money, Brandon had said. I opened my eyes. The clarity that washed over me was absolute. It was the cold. A sharp focus of a sniper, adjusting for windage. There was no grief here. Grief is what you feel when you lose something you hope to keep. I realized, standing in that designer kitchen, that I had lost them years ago. Today was just the day the paperwork finally caught up with the reality. I walked to the wine fridge and pulled out the bottle of 98 Chateau Margaux my mother had demanded. The glass was cold and heavy. They wanted the good stuff. They wanted to celebrate their financial acumen. They wanted to toast to the brilliance of robbing the only person in the room who knew how to actually hunt down a thief. I checked my watch. The transaction had cleared yesterday. That meant the digital footprint was already solidified. They hadn't just stolen from a daughter, they had robbed a federal executive. In their arrogance, they had crossed a jurisdiction line they didn't even know existed. I took a breath, smoothing the invisible wrinkles in my clerk persona. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I wouldn't give them tears. I would give them exactly what they expected, the obedient, invisible servant. I would serve them the wine. And while they drank it, I would burn their world down from the inside out. The math was simple. They had liquidated my assets. Now, I was going to liquidate their immunity. I pushed off the counter, bottle in hand, and headed back toward the dining room. The Grey Rock Protocol was active. I was about to become the most boring, uninteresting person in the room, right up until the moment I became the only thing that mattered. I stopped in the butler's pantry, just out of sight of the dining room archway. The air here was still, smelling of silver polish and old money. Through the gap in the swinging door, I could see the sliver of my mother's back. She was laughing, topping off Brandon's glass with the cheaper wine they'd been drinking before I fetched the vintage bottle. They were celebrating the successful liquidation of their problem child's assets. I set the Chateau Margaux on the counter. My hand didn't shake. In my line of work, tremors are a liability. If you shake when you're cutting the red wire, you don't just lose the bomb, you lose the city. I reached into the hidden lining of my clutch and pulled out my secure satellite phone. It looked like a standard smartphone to the untrained eye. But the encryption inside was heavy enough to sink a battleship. I keyed in a sequence that didn't exist in any public directory. It rang once. Director Harrison. The voice on the other end was sharp, gravelly. Director Vance. The only man at the Treasury who knew my full operational history. We flagged a massive unauthorized withdrawal on the Sentinel account. We were about to deploy a containment team. Is your cover blown? Negative, I whispered. My eyes locked on that sliver of the dining room. But the asset has been compromised. My parents, they used an old co-signatory authorization I thought was dormant. They drained the full 368. Understood, Vance said. His tone shifted from alarm to cold calculation. That account isn't just a piggy bank, Rosalie. It's a federal honeypot. We use it to track dark money movements. If they moved that cash, they just lit up every watch list from here to the Caymans. I know, I said. That's why I'm calling. I'm initiating the Grey Rock Protocol. You want us to hold off on the raid? No, I said. I want you to wait until the wire transfer hits the destination bank. I want the crime to be irrevocable. Until then, I am going to be the most boring, uninteresting person in the room. I need 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Vance confirmed. Then we burn it down. I hung up and slipped the phone back into its hiding spot. The Grey Rock method. It's a psychological survival strategy I'd perfected over years of navigating both high-level espionage and my family's dinner table. When you are dealing with narcissists or terrorists, You don't fight back. You don't scream. You don't give them the emotional fuel they crave. You become a gray rock. Unremarkable. Dull. You give them no surface to grab onto. They thought my silence over the last 6 years was submission. They thought my data entry job was a lack of ambition. They didn't understand that being uninteresting was my camouflage. While they were busy preening and projecting, I was in the shadows, building a career that protected the national economy. The money they stole wasn't just savings from typing numbers into a spreadsheet. It was hazard pay from the Jakarta operation. It was the bonus I got for identifying the crypto wallet used by a human trafficking ring. It was blood money, earned in the dark. And they were treating it like an allowance I hadn't earned. I picked up the bottle of wine. The glass was sweating in the humidity. To them, I was Rosalie the clerk, the timid girl who needed her mommy to help her open a bank account. They had no idea they were currently robbing the director of cyber financial intelligence. There is a specific kind of power in being underestimated. It's the power of the landmine. You don't know it's there until you step on it. I smoothed my face into a mask of placid obedience. I practiced the slump in my shoulders, the slightly averted gaze. I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to feel safe. Because a predator is most vulnerable the moment they think the prey has stopped struggling. I pushed through the door, walking back into the lion's den with a bottle of wine and a death sentence in my pocket. Took you long enough, Brooke snapped, looking up from her phone. Did you get lost in the pantry? Sorry, I murmured, pouring the wine into Brandon's glass. I couldn't find the corkscrew. Typical, Dad muttered, shaking his head. Always struggling with the basics. I poured. I nodded. I became the gray rock. And I waited for the timer to run out. I sat back down at the table, sliding into my seat with the silent precision of a ghost. The 98 Margot sat in the center of the table, breathing, while my family suffocated the room with their self-importance. Finally, Brandon said, holding out his glass without looking at me. Pour. I filled his glass. Then Dad's. Then Mom's. I moved around the table like a clockwork servant, my face a perfect mask of dull compliance. This is it. Everyone, Brooke announced, holding her phone up at a high angle. The ring light reflected in her eyes. She was live streaming. Of course she was. Live from the Harrison Innovation Summit, we are celebrating a massive capital injection into Brandon's AI project. Big things coming. Unicorn status. Here we come. She panned the camera around the table. Say hi. Mom, say hi. Dad. My parents waved, putting on their best benevolent billionaire smiles. Angela tilted her head to minimize her neck waddle. Richard puffed out his chest. They looked like royalty. They looked untouchable. And there's Rosalie, Brooke said, pointing the lens at me. Her voice dropped an octave, dripping with fake sympathy. She's helping out, keeping it low-key today. She didn't wait for me to wave. She panned back to Brandon, the star of the show. Tell them about the algorithm. B. It's about predictive liquidity. Brandon pontificated, swirling the wine I had just poured, wine bought with the interest from my stolen hazard pay. Most people play checkers with the market. My code plays 4D chess. We just needed a little bridge capital to clear the initial hurdles. And now sky's the limit. To the velocity of money, Dad toasted, raising his glass. To vision, Mom added. They clinked crystal. The sound rang through the room like a bell tolling. I took a sip of my water. I watched them drink. I watched the wine stain, their lips dark red. They had no idea that they were drinking evidence. They had no idea that the bridge capital they were celebrating was actually a radioactive isotope they had just injected into their financial veins. Then, I felt it. A single, long vibration against my thigh. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was a haptic signal from the secure phone hidden in the fold of my dress. A Priority 1 alert. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting a piece of asparagus into thirds. Under the table, I slid my hand onto the phone and pressed the biometric reader. I didn't need to look at the screen to know what it said. But I glanced down anyway, shielding the glow with my napkin. Sentinel alert, honeypot breach confirmed. Target Harrison, Maine, trust, status flagged. Tier 1 threat. A cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. So slight that Brooke's camera wouldn't even pick it up. They thought they had robbed a savings account. They thought they had raided a piggy bank I kept for a rainy day. They were wrong. The account Angela had co-signed 6 years ago wasn't just a holding pen for my classified salary. It was a honeypot. In counterintelligence finance, you don't just track criminals, you bait them. You set up accounts that look juicy, vulnerable, and dormant. You load them with funds that are digitally tagged, like die packs in a bank robbery. Then, you watch. We used that account to track the movement of illicit funds across international borders. It was monitored 24/7 by the Treasury's Cybercrimes Division. It was designed to catch Russian oligarchs trying to bypass sanctions or cartels washing drug money. It had a digital tripwire. Any unauthorized transfer over $10,000 didn't just notify the bank, it notified the National Security Council. By draining $368,000 in a single transaction to cover a margin call, my parents hadn't just committed theft. They had flagged themselves as sophisticated cyber criminals. To the automated federal systems now waking up in server farms across Virginia, the Harrison family wasn't a group of wealthy narcissists. They were a hostile entity, engaging in a massive exfiltration of monitored federal assets. "Rosie, you're not eating," Mom said, frowning at my plate. "Don't pout. It's unattractive." "I'm not pouting," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just thinking about the algorithm." Brandon preened. "Trying to wrap your head around it. Don't hurt yourself." "Sis, it's high-level stuff." "I bet it is," I said. The irony was delicious. Brandon thought his algorithm was the most advanced piece of code in the room. He didn't realize that the transaction he just processed had triggered a counter-algorithm designed by the NSA. The honeypot protocol was simple: identify, isolate, incinerate. Once the money moved, the trap snapped shut. The Treasury would freeze not just that account, but every account linked to the transfer. Brandon's LLC, my parents' personal accounts, the estate trust, Brooke's credit cards. Everything was about to go dark. They had walked right into a cage designed for tigers, thinking they were stealing a kitten. "Is the wine to your liking?" I asked, looking at my father. "It's adequate," Richard said, swirling it. "A bit tight. Needs to breathe more." "Oh. It will," I thought. "It's going to breathe just fine." I checked my watch. Vance said 20 minutes. 19 had passed. The smart lights in the dining room flickered once. Then they turned a solid, unblinking red. The mood lighting system my father had installed for thousands of dollars suddenly defaulted to its emergency setting. "What the hell?" Brandon looked up. "Brooke, did you mess with the app?" "No," Brooke said, tapping her phone. "My screen is frozen. I lost the stream." "Mine too," Mom said, tapping her tablet. "No signal." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. The gray rock was cracking, revealing the diamond underneath. "It's not the app," I said softly. They all looked at me. For the first time all day. I had their full attention. What did you say? Dad asked. It's not the app, I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. It's the lockdown. From the front drive, the sound of heavy tires on gravel shattered the evening. Not one car. Many. The screech of brakes. The heavy thud of boots hitting the pavement. What is that? Mom stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. That, I said, taking a sip of my water, is the United States Treasury. The front doors didn't open, they were breached. A battering ram hit the reinforced oak with a sound like a thunderclap, splintering the frame my father had imported from Italy. The room filled with the chaotic, disciplined noise of a federal raid. Federal agents' hands where we can see them. Stay seated. A tactical team swarmed the dining room. These weren't local cops. These were Treasury agents in full tactical gear. Weapons drawn. Moving with the terrifying efficiency of a wolf pack. This is an outrage, Dad roared, standing up and knocking his chair over. His face was a mask of purple fury. Do you know who I am? I have Senator Warwick on speed dial. Get out of my house. Sit down. Richard, a lead agent, barked, not breaking stride. I will not sit down, Dad shouted, pointing a trembling finger. I am Richard Harrison, and I demand to speak to your commanding officer. The lead agent stopped. He was a mountain of a man, his face hidden behind a tactical visor until he flipped it up. It was Vance. He looked at my father with the kind of bored indifference usually reserved for insects. I am the commanding officer, Vance said, and I'm not here for you. He turned his back on my father, a deliberate, lethal insult, and walked straight toward me. The room went silent. My mother was clutching her pearls, her eyes darting between the guns and me. Brandon looked like he was about to be sick. Vance stopped in front of my chair. He snapped his heels together and offered a sharp, crisp salute. Director Harrison, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. The perimeter is secure. Assets have been frozen. The transport team is ready for the suspects. I set my water glass down. The sound of crystal hitting wood was the only noise in the room. Director Brooke whispered. She looked at me, her phone still in her hand. The live stream dead. Rosie, what is he talking about? I stood up. I didn't smooth my skirt this time. I stood to my full height, shedding the slump I'd worn for 6 years like a heavy coat. I looked at my mother, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish. I looked at Brandon, who was sweating through his linen shirt. Data entry. I said, my voice cool and resonant. That was the cover. It was boring. It was safe. It was designed to keep you uninterested. I walked around the table, the heels of my shoes clicking on the marble floor. I stopped behind Dad's chair. I am the Director of Cyber Financial Intelligence for the United States Treasury, I said. The money in that account was an allowance. It wasn't savings. It was a federal honeypot used to track international money laundering syndicates. And by draining it, you didn't just steal from your daughter. You committed a Tier 1 act of cyber terrorism against the United States government. No, Mom gasped, grabbing the table for support. No. We just moved it. For the family. It was an investment. It was theft, I corrected. And because of who I am, and where that money came from. It's not a civil matter. It's treason. Vance handed me a thick folder. I tossed it onto the table, right on top of the spilled wine. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Brandon. Those are the indictments, I said. Wire fraud, grand larceny, Violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And for you? Brandon, I looked at my brother, whose arrogance had dissolved into terror. Structuring financial transactions to evade federal reporting requirements. That algorithm of yours. The Treasury analysts looked at it while we were waiting for the wire to clear. It's a Ponzi scheme. A bad one. It's not. Brandon stammered. It's predictive. It's over. I said. Take them. I told Vance. Rosie Mom screamed as an agent pulled her arms behind her back. Rosie. Stop this. We're your parents. I know. I said, watching them with clinical detachment. That's why I'm not asking for the death penalty. I watched them get marched out, Richard shouting threats. Angela weeping about her reputation. Brandon silent and shaking. I didn't feel sad. I felt like a surgeon who had just cut out a tumor. It was messy. Yes. But the patient was finally going to live. The aftermath was efficient. Federal forfeiture laws are designed to move faster than regret. By the time the sun came up over Newport, the Harrison estate was taped off. The assets were seized. And the Innovation Summit was the lead story on every financial news network. I didn't stay to watch the circus. I went home. Not to the decoy apartment with the thin walls and the leaking faucet. I went to my real home. A penthouse in D.C. with biometric locks, bulletproof glass, and a view of the Potomac. I walked in, kicked off my heels, and walked into my command center. It was a wall of monitors, humming with data streams from global markets. This was my world. A world of logic, consequence, and absolute precision. I sat in my chair, leather, ergonomic, designed for 12-hour shifts, hunting the wolves of Wall Street. I pulled up the file on the Harrison case. The recovery was already underway. The stolen funds had been clawed back before they could even settle in Brandon's account. I looked at the mugshots that had just been processed. My father looked old. My mother looked confused. They were small people who had cast long shadows only because I had been kneeling. I deleted the file from my active screen. It was done. I swiveled my chair to look out at the city lights. For years, I had hidden my light under a bushel to keep them from blowing it out. I had minimized my intelligence, my success, and my power just to fit into the small box they had built for me. I had let them treat me like a spare part because I wanted to be part of the machine. But the machine was broken, and I was the mechanic. I thought about everyone else out there, the quiet ones, the workers, the ones who keep their heads down and get the job done, while the loudmouths take the credit. To everyone building an empire in the dark while the world mocks your silence, keep building. The reveal is coming. You are not invisible. You are undercover. They mistake your silence for weakness because they have never seen a predator waiting in the tall grass. They think you are empty because you don't rattle when they shake you. Let them talk. Let them boast. Let them steal the credit and the spotlight. You hold the keys. You know where the bodies are buried because you dug the holes. When the time comes, you won't have to shout. You won't have to beg for respect. You will just have to stand up. I turned back to my screens. The market was opening in Tokyo. A crypto exchange in Malta was showing irregular activity. There was work to do. I typed in my login credentials. Director Harrison. Access granted. If you are winning battles nobody knows about, this story is for you. Share this if you're done apologizing for your own success. I'll see you in the comments.